So why are we called Gia? So Gia
Yes.
is really an homage to our multilingual and global team's heritage. We speak a bunch of languages here. Gia or Jia as pronounced in Chinese means home or family. And my co-founder Cheng is from China. And so we think that the home or the family is sort of the central financial unit that we're expanding upon. In Hindi, Gia means heart. And I spent a bunch of time working in microfinance in India. So I think there's a lot of Hindi connection and what drives what I'm doing. But we're trying to provide banking with a heart. And finally, in Swahili, which is what they speak in Kenya, which is our first market, Njia means road or path. And so we think of this as building the road or path to financial independence. So there's three languages that inform the name.
That's amazing. Welcome everyone to Web3 Founders, short snackable conversations with the next generation of founders. Today we have a very special guest. He is the founder and CEO of Gia. Hi Zach, how are you?
Hey, Josefina, I love that. Snackable bites. I can't wait to
Yeah,
get into this.
yeah, I love it. So describe Gia in one sentence.
At Gia, we are putting small business owners and entrepreneurs around the world in control of their financial destiny.
And what is the problem that you're solving?
The main problem we're solving is that there is a $5 trillion credit gap for small businesses in emerging markets. So we provide blockchain-based small business financing to these small businesses. But if you went to visit the stand of one of our first borrowers in Kenya, a guy named Francis who sells spices and fruits and vegetables in a market near Nairobi, one of his challenges is he has to keep buying his inventory in really small units, which means he runs out of inventory quite often and can't do transactions. So Gia partners with local wholesalers, suppliers, other networks that serve small businesses, and we use their data to underwrite and then provide a fair financial offer for small businesses like Francis so they can grow their business. And, Francis, in his case in particular, when I first met him, I remember a customer coming up to try to buy some sesame seeds, and Francis had run out. And he said, "Well, yeah, I have to buy my sesame seeds every other day because I can't afford the 100 kg shipment. I can only do the 10 kg." And now with our loans, he's always stocked. He's making way higher margins. He's growing his stall. So that's our solution, and that's some example of the results.
Yeah, excellent. So why why does blockchain adds any value to that solution, right? Like what is special about like blockchain and why that is adding value to your solution in particular?
Yeah, there are a few places it adds value, but I should just preface this answer to say that in the eyes of someone like Francis, like who cares that it used blockchain? I think in the West and VCs and in tech conversations, people like to talk about blockchain, but it's just another technology that helps power a solution. I mean, we're just trying to solve this challenge, which is access to finance. We use blockchain in a few ways. The first and main way we do today is as a capital aggregator source. So there's lots of capital on chain, which is looking for returns powered by real world productive assets. Right now, a lot of the money that's on chain, and there's some $2 trillion on crypto right now. A lot of it is sort of just sloshing around in the sort of online casino of speculative assets, but not really doing much. And so we give that liquidity a chance to get put to work. In addition to just sort of helping people in crypto get returns, this is just a better solution for the end borrower as well, because the cost of capital is significantly lower than when you source it off chain. And this is even just as simple as the fact that it's very expensive to move money across borders. It's very expensive to underwrite credit deals in other countries. But since we're able to provide transparency into the deals we're doing, it's easier for global investors to participate. And we're able to sort of just bypass the current process. I worked in microfinance for basically my whole career for 10 plus years before starting Gia. And what I saw is a lot of times small business owners just get sort of stuck in the same cycle of maybe they're taking some loans, but the interest rates aren't necessarily coming down and they're not really building wealth. They're sort of just like in this sort of debt treadmill. And so what ends up happening, I mean, I worked at a fintech lender before this, and what would happen is the equity value of the lending company continues to grow, But the end borrowers who are powering that equity growth don't really get to participate in it. And that's not necessarily because existing lenders are greedy and don't want to share. It's just there's never really been a good way to distribute ownership around the globe to a wide network of people. But using the blockchain, you can represent ownership on chain with a token. That token can basically behave like an equitable claim to a stream of revenues. And then we can distribute that token really freely and efficiently. And so what we do is we provide token-based rewards to our borrowers so that they're not just customers on the end of a one-way transaction, but actually are owners and builders of this community. And as Gia's value grows, their value grows as well.
That's fascinating too. But how it works, for example, for Francis' example, how he would become an owner of a token for Gia, like how that works and how that changed the traditional way of microfinance.
Well, in some ways, it's actually building on the early principles of microfinance. This credit gap I described has been around for as long as we've had formal credit and people like living around the world. First wave of solutions like microfinance 1.0 really leveraged community finance groups. And traditionally throughout human history, the way people save and borrow has been in small circles. I mean, it would be Josefina, be you, me, and like 10 of our friends from our community. Maybe we're in the similar business, or maybe we're just all connected because we're cousins or something. But we'd sort of save and borrow from a common pool of money that we are all owners of. I mean, in a formalized sense, this would be like a cooperative where, borrowers are also savers and members of that co-op. And that's what sort of initial approaches to microfinance used. The challenge is traditionally that a lot of these cooperative groups would kind of fall apart after they get to a certain size because people didn't know each other, so there wouldn't be as much trust. And for microfinance institutions to operate them, they're just very expensive and completely uses like manual processes. So they couldn't really scale, and usually they couldn't really source any capital beyond their group. To sort of an approach to try to make this more scalable and bring in outside capital is what I think of as the second wave of microfinance 2.0, which is sort of fintech lending that I was a part of as well. And there we source capital from outside, and we were able to provide a technology-based product. In the case of the company I worked at, we used mobile phone data to underwrite folks so they could just provide them quick loans on an app. The challenge is there was no way to distribute that ownership to these borrowers, even if they wanted it. And many, by the way, did. And a lot of the folks would ask, hey, can I have shares because I love working, borrowing from you guys. And as a result, because they couldn't have those shares, I think there's pretty low loyalty, which results in higher default rates. And when there's a higher portion of defaults, then the price has to be higher, and people end up paying pretty high costs for these loans. And so really our key thesis is that by turning borrowers into owners and really members of a community as opposed to just customers, they are going to repay at higher rates, and is going to better align the incentives of both lenders and borrowers because everyone is a common owner.
My question is how you make that happen in a non digital way, just because you're going to the base of the pyramid, the interactions are less digital than what we know, and that's why microfinances groups worked so well at some point, because there was like people going to these places, right? And that's very expensive from a CAC perspective.
Yeah.
So how do you see that with Gia, right? Like how you build that community, even there are owners having a token, probably that's not that real, or they cannot see it directly. Or
how do you make the token feel meaningful to someone if they're not exposed to the concept of a token before? And we totally don't expect anyone to understand things about tokenomics or anything on day one. Really, what the token does, and this is another cool thing about blockchain, is with the concept of a token, you really have this programmable money. So it's not just a currency. You can program sort of features into it. And so with the Gia token, when borrowers accumulate it, it actually unlocks credit rewards for them. So most people actually just think of their Gia tokens as sort of like loyalty points that unlock a better experience. So they get lower interest rates or higher loan amounts. I really like that you asked about just like in-person stuff versus digital. My philosophy is, having worked in financial technology for a little while now, has always been it's much harder to create totally new behavior among folks than to take what someone already does offline in the real world and just provide a digital solution that makes it slightly better for them digitally, right?
Mhm.
And that's how we think of a lot of our products. So you talked about community, and for us, I mean, community, like it's most powerful, I think, when it's in person. But a lot of times, what that community is doing when it's, say, small business owners in a market, it's like Francis and some of the other vendors and Get to Where I Market all getting together and talking. A lot of times, what they're doing is sharing information about suppliers or prices, or how we're going to deal with there's a strike planned in our community. What are we going to do with
Yeah.
the stalls, or just like very logistical stuff of running a business. Um, and what we are able to do is sort of take those existing communities where those kind of conversations are happening. Some of them are just so hyper local, you don't really need to digitize them. But a lot of them, it's actually quite helpful to be able to see beyond your immediate neighborhood. So, like, a really good example is there are all these medical clinics in Kenya who we serve now because we work through one of their wholesalers who sort of sells medicines to them. And there's so much like tactical advice that comes into running a medical clinic.
Uh-huh.
Everything from, like, oh, how do we store the drugs, or which new drugs do we have a shipment of in this country, and how do we access cheaper supplies? How do we, who should we refer folks to if they need an X-ray and we don't have one? Just even basic kind of stuff like this. And a lot of them weren't necessarily connected. I mean, sure, there are some informal WhatsApp groups of different medical clinics, but now that we're serving so many of them with this medical inventory financing product, we actually have an online digital community for them to exchange information. Now, I do think that once you start to really create a community, then you have this asset. And if you do bring that on chain, you can do really powerful things with that, right? You can unlock liquidity for that whole community instead of maybe just one lender trying to underwrite one medical clinic. Imagine if we could underwrite an entire collective or cooperative of medical clinics.
So, Zach, thank you so much. I want to one last question to close this lovely
Sure.
conversation here. So, some founders are passionate and some founders are opportunistic, right? Which type
Mm.
of founder are you?
Oh, I think it's probably not a question. I'm just very much a passionate founder. This is a problem I've been working on for my whole career, and I'll just kind of keep on working on it, whether I'm a founder or an employee at a company or just an advocate on the sidelines.